I never thought I'd be the type of person who could cut someone off completely. Not until those words left her mouth. My name is Rebecca, and at 32, I thought I had my life figured out. I'm an accountant with a decent practice in suburban Philadelphia, divorced but happily co-parenting my beautiful 8-year-old daughter Zoe with my ex-husband. We're cordial enough that holidays aren't awkward, and we both put Zoe first. I bought a modest 3-bedroom home in a good school district after the divorce, and I've been slowly turning it into our sanctuary. I also maintained a close relationship with my mother, or so I thought. For years, I've been quietly paying her mortgage since Dad died and left her with almost nothing but debt. She never even knew. I arranged it all through the bank, making the payments directly. It wasn't a burden. My practice does well enough. And I believed family takes care of family. That belief shattered on a Sunday evening last fall. Mom was coming over for our regular family dinner. Nothing special, just the meal I'd prepared dozens of times before. Roast chicken, her favorite mashed potatoes with the skin left on, and green beans with almonds. Zoe was excited because Grandma usually brought her little gifts, usually something small from the dollar store, but my daughter treasured them nonetheless. I was in the kitchen putting finishing touches on the gravy when I heard them in the living room. I wasn't eavesdropping. Their voices simply carried through our open floor plan. "Grandma, look at my new dance moves," Zoe said, twirling in her favorite purple dress. She'd been taking ballet lessons for a few months and loved showing off what she'd learned. That's when my mother said it, her voice carrying that distinctive tone I knew too well. Feigned concern, masking judgment. "Oh, honey, have you been playing outside a lot? You're getting darker. Your skin looks so ethnic lately." My wooden spoon froze mid-stir. The kitchen suddenly felt ice cold. Zoe's father is Dominican. His beautiful complexion is one of the things that attracted me to him when we first met. Our daughter has his warm brown eyes and olive skin that tans easily in the summer sun. She's perfect. "What do you mean, Grandma?" Zoe's voice had lost its enthusiasm. "Well, girls with lighter skin just look cleaner, don't you think? Maybe we should get you some of those brightening creams I see on TV." I felt physically ill. The casual way she delivered this poison to my child, like she was suggesting a haircut or new shoes. I'd heard comments like this from her before, of course. Little digs about Zoe's hair being too curly or how she doesn't look much like our side of the family. I'd brushed them off, made excuses. My mother was from a different generation. She didn't mean any harm. I'd convinced myself she just needed time to adjust, but this was different. This was direct. This was her telling my daughter, my beautiful, confident, joyful little girl, that her skin was wrong, that she needed to be fixed. I set down the spoon and walked to the doorway, watching as Zoe's small shoulders hunched forward. She was looking down at her arms like she was seeing them for the first time. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "Zoe's skin is absolutely perfect exactly as it is." My mother gave me that dismissive smile she'd perfected over decades. "Oh, Rebecca, don't be so sensitive. I'm just looking out for her. You know how people can be." "What people, Mom?" "People like you." Zoe looked between us, sensing the tension. I forced a smile. "Sweetie, can you go wash your hands for dinner? It's almost ready." Once Zoe was out of earshot, I turned back to my mother. "We don't talk that way in this house. Ever. I know exactly what you were just doing, and it stops now." Dinner was a silent affair. I made small talk with Zoe about school and her upcoming recital, but my mother picked at her food, occasionally sighing to signal her martyrdom. When she left, her goodbye was curt. No kiss on the cheek, no see you next weekend. That night, after tucking Zoe in, I sat alone in my kitchen with a glass of wine, replaying every comment my mother had ever made about my daughter, my ex-husband, and anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. How many times had I looked the other way? How many poisonous comments had Zoe absorbed when I wasn't in earshot? The next morning, I dropped Zoe at school and drove straight to my office. I canceled my first appointment, closed the door, and called the bank. "I need to stop an automatic payment," I told the representative. "Of course, Miss Walsh. Which payment would you like to cancel?" "The mortgage payment for 1487 Oakwood Drive. My mother's address. I see that payment has been set up for the past 7 years. Did you want to change the payment method or amount?" "No, I want to cancel it completely, effective immediately." There was a pause. "Ma'am, just to confirm, You understand this will mean the mortgage holder will need to make other arrangements for payment. I understand completely. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, staring at the family photo I kept there. Zoe, me, and my mother at the beach last summer. I thought I might feel guilt or remorse, but instead, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For 7 years, I'd been silently supporting a woman who couldn't even respect my child's dignity. I'd been enabling her to continue living in a home where she'd no doubt entertain friends who shared her outdated, harmful views. I'd been the dutiful daughter, the fixer, the one who made everything okay. Not anymore. I expected the phone call within days, but my mother surprised me. A week passed, then 2. Finally, nearly 3 weeks later, my phone rang during dinner. Rebecca? Her voice was tight, controlled. I just received a notice from the bank. They're saying my mortgage payment is past due. Yes, I said, getting up from the table and walking to the living room for privacy. I know. What do you mean? You know. I've been making your mortgage payments since Dad died. Mom, every month for 7 years. The silence on the other end stretched for so long I thought she might have hung up. That's not possible, she finally said. Henry set up an annuity for me before he passed. That's where the money comes from. I almost laughed. Dad had been terrible with money his entire life. There was no annuity, just mountains of debt that I'd quietly settled after his funeral. She'd been living in a fantasy. There was never an annuity, Mom. Just me, paying $780 every month to keep you in that house. Why would you? Her voice cracked. Why wouldn't you tell me? Because you needed help, and I could give it. That's what family does. I took a deep breath. Or at least, that's what I thought family did. Until I heard you tell my daughter that her skin was too dark. That's what this is about. Rebecca, you're overreacting. I was just looking out for her. Yes, you said that. The thing is, Mom, that's my job. And part of that job is protecting her from people who make her feel like she's not enough, even if that person is her grandmother. So you're punishing me, taking away my home because I made one comment. I'm not punishing you. I'm simply stopping a voluntary payment I've been making. What you said to Zoe wasn't one comment. It was a glimpse into how you really think. And I won't subsidize that anymore. What am I supposed to do? Her voice had taken on the panicked edge I remembered from when Dad would tell her they couldn't afford something she wanted. That's up to you. Sell the house, get a roommate, find a job, downsize. There are options. I'm 68 years old. Who's going to hire me? I don't know, Mom. But that's not my problem anymore. I hung up and returned to the table where Zoe was pushing peas around her plate. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes. Is Grandma okay? I smiled, reaching over to tuck a curl behind her ear. Grandma is figuring some things out, but we're okay. You and me? We're perfectly okay. That night, I lay awake thinking about the consequences of my decision. I'd never done anything like this before. Cut someone off financially, drawn such a firm boundary. Part of me feared I was becoming cold, calculating. But another part knew this was long overdue. The calls started the next day. First from my mother, which I let go to voicemail. Then from my aunt, her sister, demanding to know why I was abandoning my mother. Then from family friends, distant cousins, even my mother's pastor. Apparently, she'd told everyone I was forcing her into homelessness out of spite. I didn't explain myself to any of them. What would I say? My mother made racist comments to my biracial daughter, so I stopped paying her mortgage. The story would spread, be distorted, and eventually get back to Zoe. I wouldn't risk that. Instead, I maintained my silence. I blocked numbers when necessary. I declined invitations to family gatherings. I focused on my work, my daughter, and building our life. 3 months passed. Winter settled in. I wondered occasionally how my mother was managing, but I didn't reach out. The mortgage payments I no longer made went into Zoe's college fund instead. Then, on a snowy Tuesday evening in December, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting visitors, especially not in the middle of a snowstorm. When I opened the door, my heart sank. My mother stood on my porch, snow dusting her shoulders, her face tight with a mixture of anger and something else, desperation. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the entryway before I could object. I glanced toward the stairs, relieved that Zoe was already in bed. "It's late, Mom." "Is it? I wouldn't know. My electricity was shut off yesterday." She unwrapped her scarf with deliberate movements. Do you have any idea what it's like to sit in a cold, dark house in the middle of winter? I crossed my arms. What do you want? I want my daughter back. The one who understood family obligations. She looked around my home, her eyes lingering on the new artwork I'd hung, the comfortable furniture. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I have nowhere to go. There are options, I said, repeating my words from months ago. You could sell the house before foreclosure. It's worth more than you owe. And go where? A senior apartment complex? Some assisted living facility full of strangers? Her voice rose. Is that what you want for your mother? To die alone surrounded by people who don't know her? The guilt trip, her specialty. For a moment, I felt the familiar tug of responsibility, the instinct to fix everything. But then I remembered Zoe's face when my mother had commented on her skin. How small my daughter had looked. You have friends, Mom? Your church community? Your sister? They can't take me in. Jane barely has room for herself in that apartment. Then perhaps it's time to consider downsizing. The house is too big for one person anyway. She stared at me like I'd suggested she live on the street. That house has been in our family for 40 years. Your father and I raised you there. And now it's just you. Times change. Circumstances change. I took a deep breath. People change. Not like this. She shook her head. Not my Rebecca. You were always the good one, the reliable one. What happened to you? I grew up, Mom. I became a mother myself. I lowered my voice, aware that Zoe might hear us if we continued to argue. And I realized that loving someone doesn't mean enabling behavior that hurts others. This is about that comment, isn't it? About Zoe's skin? For heaven's sake, Rebecca, I was trying to help. You know how cruel children can be. The only cruelty I've seen came from you, Mother. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. In 20 years, I'd never spoken to her so directly. I made one comment. It wasn't one comment. It was one comment I happened to hear. I uncrossed my arms, suddenly tired. How many others were there when I wasn't around? How many little digs about her hair, her features, her skin? My mother's silence told me everything. That's what I thought. You're blowing this out of proportion, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, I'm seeing it clearly for the first time, and I won't allow it anymore. She looked around again, this time more desperately. So that's it. You're going to let me lose my home, after everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Mom, besides criticize my choices, undermine my parenting, and make my daughter feel less than? The question hung in the air between us. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of self-awareness in her eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the wounded martyr expression I knew so well. I gave you life, she said simply, as if that ended all discussion, and I'm grateful for that. But it doesn't give you the right to harm my daughter. She gathered her coat around her, drawing herself up with what dignity she could muster. I see. Well, when the bank takes the house, I suppose I'll just have to figure something out. At my age, alone. I suppose you will. I moved toward the door. It's late, Mom. Zoe has school tomorrow. She paused at the door. You used to be such a sweet girl, Rebecca. I don't know what happened to you. I became a mother, I repeated. Good night. After she left, I leaned against the closed door, shaking slightly. Standing up to her had never been easy, but this time felt different, final, somehow. I checked on Zoe before going to bed myself. She was sleeping peacefully, her curls splayed across the pillow, her small face relaxed. I gently brushed my fingers against her cheek, marveling at her perfect skin, her perfect everything. I've got you, I whispered, more to myself than to her. Always. The fallout was swift and expansive. Within days, family members I hadn't spoken to in years were calling, texting, and even showing up at my office. Your mother is family, my Aunt Jane insisted when she cornered me outside my building one afternoon. You can't just abandon her because of some misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said, trying to move past her toward my car. She said she was just concerned about Zoe getting sunburned. You know how fair-skinned our family is. I stopped, turning slowly to face my aunt. Is that what she told you? Jane nodded, her expression righteous. She was looking out for her granddaughter, and you overreacted. Now she's going to lose her home. That's not what happened. I felt suddenly calm, seeing how thoroughly my mother had spun the story. She told my 8-year-old daughter that her skin was too dark, that she looked ethnic, and suggested skin-lightening creams. Jane's face fell. No, she wouldn't. She did. I heard it with my own ears. Well, Jane adjusted her purse strap, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sure she didn't mean it that way. The way she meant it is exactly the problem. I unlocked my car. And frankly, Aunt Jane, the fact that you're defending those comments tells me all I need to know about where you stand, too. I drove away, watching in my rearview mirror as she stood in the parking lot, looking lost. One by one, I was seeing my family members for who they really were. It hurt, but there was clarity in the pain. At home that evening, I found a voicemail from my ex-husband, Miguel. Rebecca, it's me. Your mother called me today. His voice sounded concerned. She was saying some strange things about you cutting her off financially, and something about comments she made to Zoe. Call me when you can. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temples. Of course she'd call Miguel. She was gathering allies, building her case against me. I returned his call immediately, not wanting him to hear only her version. She said what to Zoe? Miguel's voice rose after I explained the situation. Though our marriage hadn't worked out, we'd always been united in our love for our daughter. I was in the kitchen when it happened. She didn't know I could hear. Dios mío, he muttered. Has Zoe said anything to you about it since? No, but she's been quieter lately. Less excited about visiting my family. Kids pick up on more than we realize. He paused. You've been paying her mortgage all this time? Since Dad died. She thought it was coming from some mythical annuity he set up. Miguel was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of money, Rebecca. About $20,000 a year. He whistled softly. And she never knew. I didn't want her to feel like a charity case. I just wanted to help. That's very you, he said. And I could hear the smile in his voice. Are you always taking care of everyone? Not anymore, I replied. At least not her. I think you made the right call. For what it's worth. Another pause. Do you need me to talk to Zoe about any of this? Not yet. I'm hoping she'll bring it up when she's ready. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table looking over my finances. The truth was, stopping my mother's mortgage payments had made a significant difference in my monthly budget. I'd been putting most of it into Zoe's college fund, but I'd also started a small investment account for myself, something I'd never had the luxury of doing before. For 7 years, I'd been quietly sacrificing my own financial security to maintain my mother's lifestyle, all while she continued to harbor attitudes that could damage my daughter's self-esteem and identity. The realization made me angry all over again. That weekend, Zoe was with Miguel. I used the time to catch up on work and decompress. On Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was Pastor Williams from my mother's church. Rebecca. He greeted me with a solemn nod. May I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Pastor Williams had been kind to me after my father's death, and unlike my relatives, he'd never been judgmental about my divorce. Your mother is in a difficult situation, he began once we were seated in my living room. She's facing foreclosure, and at her age, starting over would be challenging. I understand that, I said, but I'm not in a position to continue supporting her financially. He nodded thoughtfully. She mentioned there was some disagreement between you two. Something about a comment she made to your daughter? I studied his face, trying to gauge how much my mother had shared. Did she tell you what she said? She indicated it was a misunderstanding about sunscreen. I almost laughed. That's not what happened, Pastor. I recounted the incident truthfully. To his credit, he listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled. I see, he said when I finished. That's concerning. It is, especially since it wasn't an isolated incident. He clasped his hands together. Rebecca, I won't defend those comments. They're inappropriate and hurtful, but I wonder if there might be a path forward that doesn't involve your mother losing her home. What are you suggesting? Perhaps some counseling. Our church offers family mediation services. If your mother could understand the impact of her words and commit to change, I shook my head. With all due respect, Pastor, my mother is 68 years old. Her views on race and ethnicity aren't going to change through a few counseling sessions. People can surprise you, he said gently, especially when faced with consequences. Maybe. I didn't believe it for a second. But my priority is protecting my daughter, not saving my mother from consequences she brought on herself. Pastor Williams sighed. The church might be able to help with temporary housing, but our resources are limited. I appreciate you trying to help her, I said sincerely. But this isn't a situation I created. For years, I've been quietly supporting her, asking nothing in return except basic respect for my family. She couldn't provide even that. After he left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, watching the winter sun set early over my small yard. I thought about what Pastor Williams had said about people changing when faced with consequences. Was it possible my mother could learn from this? Part of me doubted it. Another part wondered if I should at least give her the chance. The next morning, I received an email notification from my bank. My mother had attempted to access my account information. I called the bank immediately, heart pounding. "How is this possible?" I demanded. "I never gave her access to my accounts." "It appears she presented herself at our main branch," the representative explained. "She had your social security number and claimed to be authorized on your account." Fortunately, our teller followed protocol and requested additional identification, which she couldn't provide. My hands were shaking as I hung up. My social security number. She must have gone through my personal documents at some point. The violation felt enormous. I called my lawyer during my lunch break, explaining the situation. "I need to protect myself and my assets," I told her. "And I'm concerned about what she might do next. Based on what you've described, you might want to consider a restraining order," my lawyer advised. "Attempting to fraudulently access your financial accounts is serious." A restraining order against my own mother? Even after everything, the idea seemed extreme. At minimum, I'd suggest a cease and desist letter. We can outline the specific behaviors that need to stop: the financial fraud attempt, the harassment through family members, showing up at your home unannounced. I agreed to the letter, feeling a strange mix of resolve and sadness. This wasn't how I'd ever imagined my relationship with my mother would evolve, but her actions were leaving me no choice. That evening, as I was helping Zoe with her homework, she looked up from her math worksheet with a serious expression. "Mom, why doesn't Grandma come over for dinner anymore?" I set down my pen, choosing my words carefully. "Grandma and I are taking some time apart right now. We had a disagreement." She nodded, absorbing this. Is it because of what she said about my skin? My heart sank. "You remember that?" "Yeah." She looked down at her arms. "She's said stuff like that before, about how I don't look like you, or how my hair is so different." I took her hands in mine. "Zoe, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your skin, your hair, everything about you is absolutely perfect. Grandma has some old-fashioned ideas that are wrong, and I won't let anyone make you feel less than amazing about who you are, not even family." She squeezed my hands. "I know, Mom. Dad says I'm perfect too. He says I'm the best of both of you." "He's right about that." I smiled, blinking back tears. "You definitely got his good looks and my math skills." She giggled, returning to her homework. I watched her, marveling at her resilience, her natural confidence. I'd do anything to protect that, even if it meant cutting ties with my own mother. The cease and desist letter was delivered the following week. 2 days later, my mother's response arrived, not through legal channels, but through the local newspaper. The headline jumped out at me from the community section of our local paper. "Abandoned mother faces homelessness after daughter cuts financial support." I nearly choked on my coffee, scanning the article with growing horror. My mother had given a full interview, casting herself as the victim of a heartless daughter who had suddenly withdrawn financial support without explanation, leaving her facing foreclosure after decades of maternal sacrifice. "I raised her as a single mother after her father passed," she was quoted saying. "I went without so she could have everything. Now that I'm elderly and vulnerable, she's turned her back on me completely." The article mentioned that I was a successful accountant, while my mother was living on a meager fixed income. It painted me as cold, calculating, and cruel. What it didn't mention was that my father had been alive until I was 25, that I'd been paying her mortgage secretly for 7 years, or that her fixed income would have been perfectly adequate for a reasonable lifestyle if she'd been willing to downsize. And of course, there was no mention of her comments about my daughter. I set the paper down, hands trembling with anger. This was a new low, even for her. She had taken our private family matter public, twisting the narrative to gain sympathy. My phone started ringing almost immediately, clients who had seen the article, friends asking what was going on, even my daughter's school principal, delicately inquiring if everything was stable at home. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I called my lawyer. "She's escalating," I said when Sarah picked up. "She went to the newspaper." Sarah sighed. "I was afraid something like this might happen. Did she mention you or your daughter by name?" "Just me." She referred to Zoe as her biracial granddaughter in one quote, but no name. "Small mercies," Sarah muttered. "Let me see the article. We might have grounds for defamation, depending on what she claimed." I forwarded her the link to the online version, which had already accumulated dozens of sympathetic comments. "People are calling me a monster," I said quietly. "People love a simple narrative," Sarah replied. "Ungrateful daughter abandons elderly mother makes for better clickbait than woman stops enabling mother who made racist comments to her child." What do I do? Issue a statement? Sue the paper? Neither, for now. A response only extends the news cycle. The paper likely only heard her side, but they did nothing legally wrong by reporting it. She paused. Has the cease and desist been effective otherwise? No more attempts to access your accounts or showing up at your home? Not so far. Then let's stay the course. The newspaper story will blow over. Local news has a short memory. But it didn't blow over, at least not immediately. My mother had tapped into something powerful. The societal expectation that children, especially daughters, should care for aging parents regardless of circumstance. The comments on the online article grew more vicious. Someone posted my office address. Another suggested people boycott my accounting practice. A few even defended me, questioning whether there might be more to the story, but they were quickly shouted down by those who saw only an elderly woman being abandoned. 3 days after the article appeared, I arrived at my office to find an elderly woman waiting outside. "Are you Rebecca Walsh?" she asked as I approached. I hesitated, suddenly wary. "Yes. Your mother goes to my church." She thrust an envelope at me. "She asked me to give you this." Before I could respond, she turned and hobbled away, leaving me holding the envelope like it might bite. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an eviction notice from the bank. Final warning before foreclosure proceedings. My mother had scrawled a note across the bottom. "Is this what you wanted?" I stuffed the paper back into the envelope and unlocked my office, trying to steady my breathing. This was emotional manipulation, pure and simple. I wouldn't fall for it, but as I prepared for my first client meeting, I couldn't stop thinking about the eviction notice. What would happen to her? Would she really end up homeless? Despite everything, the thought made my stomach twist. I pushed the feelings aside and focused on work. I had clients who depended on me, a daughter who needed stability, a life I'd carefully rebuilt after my divorce. I couldn't let my mother's drama derail everything. That evening, I picked Zoe up from her ballet lesson and took her for ice cream, something we did on occasion as a special treat. As she happily devoured her mint chocolate chip cone, a woman at the next table kept staring at us, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition to contempt. "Everything okay?" I asked Zoe, trying to ignore the woman. "Mm-hmm," she nodded, ice cream smeared around her mouth. "Mom, can I try out for the solo part in the spring recital? Miss Julie says I'm ready." "Of course, sweetheart. I think that's a great—" "Excuse me," the woman from the next table interrupted, standing now. "You're Rebecca Walsh, aren't you? The one from the article." I felt my shoulders tense. "I'm not discussing that." "How do you sleep at night?" she pressed, loud enough that other customers turned to stare. "Your poor mother raised you, and this is how you repay her, by putting her out on the street." Zoe looked between us, confusion clouding her face. "Mom, we're leaving," I said, standing and taking Zoe's hand. "Now, you should be ashamed," the woman called after us as we hurried out. "What kind of example are you setting for your daughter?" In the car, Zoe was quiet, working through what she'd heard. Finally, she asked, "Is Grandma going to be homeless?" I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "No, sweetheart. Grandma has options. She just doesn't want to use them." "What options?" I sighed. "She could sell her house and buy a smaller one. She could move into a senior apartment. She has choices." "Then why did that lady say you're putting her on the street?" "Because Grandma told some people a story that isn't completely true. She left out important parts." Zoe considered this. "Like the parts about my skin." I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes, like that. But also parts about how I've been helping her for years, and how she has other ways to solve her problems." "Grown-ups are complicated," Zoe concluded with 8-year-old wisdom. "Yes, they certainly are." The newspaper article had another unexpected consequence. The next morning, I received a call from Miguel's mother, Elena. "Rebecca," she greeted me warmly in her accented English. "How are you holding up, mihija?" Elena and I had always had a good relationship, even after the divorce. She adored Zoe and had never taken sides when Miguel and I separated. "I've been better," I admitted. "Did you see the article?" "See," Miguel showed me. Her voice hardened slightly. "It seems your mother has a flair for drama." "No." I laughed despite myself. "That's one way to put it." Miguel told me what she said to our Zoe. Elena clicked her tongue. "Unacceptable. That beautiful child." "Thank you for understanding," I said, feeling a rush of gratitude. Most people are just seeing a helpless old woman being abandoned by her daughter. "People see what they want to see," Elena said dismissively. "But listen, I'm calling because I have an idea. Your mother needs a place to live, yes." "Technically, yes. Though she has options she's refusing to consider. My sister Lucia is moving to Miami next month to be closer to her son. Her condo in the senior community will be empty. The rent is reasonable, and it includes utilities and maintenance." I was stunned. "Elena, that's very generous, but I don't think my mother would—" "You misunderstand," she interrupted. "I'm not offering to give her the place for free. I'm saying there is an affordable option if she truly wants to solve her housing problem, rather than just make you look bad." "Oh," I considered this. "That's actually perfect. Would Lucia be willing to speak with her?" "I've already discussed it with her. She says it's fine to give your mother her number." After thanking Elena profusely, I wrote down Lucia's contact information. This could be the solution, a concrete alternative to present to my mother, proving that her homelessness was a choice rather than an inevitability. I forwarded the information to Pastor Williams, asking him to present it to my mother as a potential solution. He responded quickly, promising to speak with her that afternoon. For the first time in months, I felt a weight lifting. Perhaps this could be resolved without further drama. I should have known better. 2 days later, Pastor Williams called me. "I spoke with your mother about Mrs. Rodriguez's condo," he began, his voice already telling me it hadn't gone well. "And she had concerns?" "What kind of concerns?" He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "She said she wasn't interested in living in, and I quote, that kind of community." My blood ran cold. She objected because it's predominantly Hispanic, didn't she? His silence confirmed it. "Thank you for trying, Pastor," I said, suddenly exhausted. "I appreciate it. Rebecca, I want you to know that I spoke quite firmly with her about her attitude. It's not consistent with Christian values, and I told her so. Did it make any difference?" "I wish I could say it did." He sounded genuinely regretful. "She's convinced herself that she's the victim in all this. It's made her defensive rather than reflective." After we hung up, I sat at my desk, a strange calm settling over me. This was the final confirmation I needed. My mother's prejudice ran so deep that she would rather face foreclosure than live in a community of people she considered beneath her. The decision crystallized in my mind. I would not resume the mortgage payments. Not now, not ever. This wasn't just about Zoe anymore, though that would have been enough. This was about my mother's fundamental character, and my unwillingness to support values so contrary to my own. I called Sarah again. "I want to make a public statement," I told her. "Are you sure that's wise?" she cautioned. "The story is already fading from public interest." "I'm sure. I'm tired of being villainized while my mother plays the victim. I won't go into personal details about Zoe, but I want to set the record straight about the financial situation." Sarah sighed. "If you're determined, let's at least make it a brief, factual statement. No accusations, no emotion. Just the timeline of financial support and a clarification that there were personal reasons for the discontinuation." We crafted a 3-paragraph statement that was measured and dignified. I sent it to the newspaper as a letter to the editor, and to my surprise, they published it 2 days later. The response was mixed. Some people appreciated the additional context and questioned why my mother had misrepresented the situation so severely. Others doubled down, suggesting that regardless of past support, abandoning an elderly parent was never justified. I didn't engage further. The statement wasn't for them anyway. It was for me, for Zoe, and for the record. A week later, I received an official notice from the bank. My mother's home was going into foreclosure. The process would take several months, but the clock was ticking. Instead of feeling guilty, I felt oddly peaceful. The situation was proceeding to its natural conclusion, one determined by my mother's choices as much as mine. I threw myself into work and family life. Zoe's spring recital was approaching, and she'd won the solo she'd auditioned for. We spent evenings practicing her routine, her confidence growing with each session. "Mom," she asked one night as I was tucking her in, "is Grandma coming to my recital?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Remember how I told you we're taking some time apart?" She nodded, her expression serious. "But it's my first solo. Maybe she'd want to come anyway." The hope in her voice made my chest ache. Despite everything, Zoe still wanted her grandmother's approval, her presence. It was a reminder that in family conflicts, children often bear the emotional burden regardless of who's right. "Would you like me to ask her?" I offered, surprising myself. Zoe's face brightened. "Yes, please. Maybe if she sees me dance, she'll remember how much she loves us." Out of the mouth of babes. I kissed her forehead, making no promises but unwilling to crush her optimism. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my mother directly. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice wary. "Rebecca?" "Hello, Mom." I kept my tone neutral. "I'm calling about Zoe's dance recital next Saturday. She has a solo, and she'd like you to be there." Silence stretched between us. Then, "I'm surprised you'd want me there, considering this isn't about what I want. It's about what Zoe wants. She misses you." Another pause. "The foreclosure date is set for the end of the month. I'll be moving into a temporary rental while I figure things out." It wasn't an answer to my invitation, but I recognized it as an olive branch of sorts, information shared voluntarily, an acknowledgement of reality rather than drama. "I'm glad you found a place," I said carefully. "It's not ideal. It's a room in Jane's apartment, and you know how small that is. But it's something—" "Mom, there are still options like Elena's sister's condo." "I'm not discussing that." She cut me off. "What time is Zoe's recital?" I swallowed my frustration and gave her the details. "She'd really like to see you there." "I'll try," she said, non-committal. No promises. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd expected. As I hung up, I wondered if this could be the beginning of a new, more honest relationship, one with proper boundaries and clear expectations. The day of the recital arrived. Zoe was a bundle of nerves and excitement, practicing her steps in the kitchen while I made breakfast, in the car on the way to the theater, backstage as we waited for the program to begin. "And do you think Grandma's here yet?" she asked for the third time, peering through the curtain at the filling auditorium. "I'm not sure, sweetie, but focus on your dance now. That's what matters." Miguel arrived, carrying a bouquet of flowers. He hugged Zoe tightly. "Why, ready to show everyone what a star you are, mija." She nodded, momentarily forgetting her grandmother in the excitement of having both parents there to support her. As the recital began, I took my seat in the audience, scanning the rows for any sign of my mother. The first few group numbers went by, and still no sign of her. Zoe's solo was scheduled for the middle of the program. Just as I was losing hope, I spotted her slipping into a seat at the back, her gray hair neatly styled, wearing the blue dress she reserved for special occasions. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. She gave a small, tentative nod. When Zoe took the stage for her solo, the theater fell silent. Her costume sparkled under the lights, her movements graceful and precise. As I watched my daughter dance, her brown skin glowing, her curls secured in a perfect bun, her face a picture of concentration and joy, I felt a fierce surge of pride. This was my child, perfect exactly as she was. Anyone who couldn't see that didn't deserve to be in her life or mine. As the final notes of Zoe's music faded, the audience erupted in applause. I rose to my feet, clapping until my hands hurt. In the back row, my mother stood too, her expression unreadable from a distance. After the recital, Zoe was surrounded by well-wishers. Miguel and I stood to the side, exchanging proud glances over our daughter's head. When the crowd thinned, I spotted my mother hovering uncertainly at the edge of the gathering. "Zoe," I said gently, "look who came to see you." She turned, her face lighting up. "Grandma!" She ran over, throwing her arms around my mother's waist. My mother patted her back stiffly, then pulled away to look at her. "You danced beautifully," she said, and for once, there was no qualification, no hidden criticism, just simple praise. "Did you like my solo?" "I practiced every day. I could tell. You were very graceful." I approached cautiously, not wanting to disrupt the moment but unwilling to leave Zoe alone with her. "Thanks for coming, Mom." She nodded, her eyes not quite meeting mine. I wouldn't miss my granddaughter's first solo. Miguel joined us, extending his hand politely. "Mrs. Walsh?" "Good to see you." My mother shook his hand briefly. "Miguel?" Her tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't openly hostile either. "Progress, of a sort." "We're taking Zoe for ice cream to celebrate," I said, testing the waters. "Would you like to join us?" Something flashed across her face. Surprise, suspicion, hope. Yes, that would be nice. As we walked to the cars, Zoe skipping ahead with Miguel, my mother fell into step beside me. "The foreclosure is final next week," she said abruptly. "All those years in that house, and now it's gone. I'm sorry it came to this," I said, and meant it. "But you know why I couldn't continue." She was quiet for a long moment. "I still think you overreacted," she finally said. "But maybe I could have chosen my words more carefully with Zoe." It wasn't an apology, not really. But from my mother, it was the closest thing I'd ever heard to one. "Careful words aren't enough, Mom. It's the thinking behind them that matters." She pressed her lips together, clearly not wanting to continue the conversation. "Let's just focus on Zoe's celebration today." I nodded, willing to set aside our differences temporarily for my daughter's sake. But as we reached the cars, I couldn't help wondering if this fragile truce would hold beyond the evening, and whether I could ever truly trust my mother with Zoe's emotional well-being again. Some wounds, I was learning, don't heal cleanly, and some debts can never be fully repaid. The ice cream outing was tense but civil. Zoe, oblivious to the undercurrents between the adults, happily dominated the conversation with details about her dance classes and upcoming school projects. My mother smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, while Miguel and I exchanged glances, silently communicating our wariness. When it was time to leave, my mother hugged Zoe goodbye with surprising tenderness. "I'm very proud of you," she said. And for once, I believed her. "Will I see you again soon?" Zoe asked, her eyes hopeful. My mother glanced at me, a question in her expression. I gave a non-committal shrug, unwilling to make promises I might not keep. "We'll see, sweetheart," she told Zoe. "I'm moving to Aunt Jane's for a while, so things are a bit unsettled." As she walked to her car, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the evening had passed without incident, sadness at the broken relationship, and lingering anger that still simmered beneath the surface. "That went better than expected," Miguel commented as we watched her drive away. "The bar was on the floor," I replied dryly. He laughed. "True, but still, progress? No, maybe." I wasn't convinced. One civil interaction didn't erase months of manipulation and decades of subtle prejudice. We'll see. The foreclosure finalized the following week, as scheduled. My mother moved in with my Aunt Jane, squeezed into the small guest bedroom of her two-bedroom apartment. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but as weeks stretched into months, it became increasingly clear that my mother had no concrete plans for finding her own place. Spring turned to summer. Zoe finished second grade with excellent marks and began swim lessons at the community pool. My accounting practice thrived, partly because the newspaper controversy had finally faded from local memory, replaced by newer, more scandalous stories. I maintained minimal contact with my mother, allowing her to see Zoe occasionally for supervised visits, usually in public places like the park or a restaurant. Never alone. Never at Jane's cramped apartment where who knows what might be said when I wasn't listening. These visits were civil but strained. My mother seemed to be making an effort with Zoe, focusing on positive interactions rather than critical comments. But I remained vigilant, waiting for the mask to slip. In late July, I received an unexpected call from Aunt Jane. "Rebecca," she began without preamble, "we need to talk about your mother." I braced myself. "What's happened?" "She can't stay with me anymore. I've tried to make it work, but it's been 4 months. My apartment isn't big enough for 2 people long-term, and frankly, she's not the easiest house guest." I wasn't surprised. My mother had always been particular about her surroundings, critical of others, housekeeping, and habits. Living in Jane's modest apartment must have been grating on both of them. "I understand," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure how I can help. She needs her own place, Rebecca. She's on a waiting list for a senior apartment, but it could be months before something opens up. In the meantime..." She let the sentence hang. In the meantime, you're hoping I'll take her in, I finished for her, or help her find another arrangement. She's your mother. The guilt trip again, as if that simple biological fact negated everything else. Jane, I've been clear about my boundaries. I'm not financially supporting her anymore. This isn't about money, Jane protested. It's about family taking care of family. Where was this concern for family when she was making racist comments to my 8-year-old daughter? Jane sighed heavily. She's trying to do better, Rebecca. She really is. I'm glad to hear it. But that doesn't change my position. I'm sorry you're in a difficult situation, but my answer is still no. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, turning the problem over in my mind. Despite everything, I didn't want my mother to be homeless. But I also wouldn't sacrifice my own financial stability or Zoe's emotional well-being to prevent it. There had to be another solution, one that didn't involve me compromising my boundaries. I called Pastor Williams, who had remained a neutral party throughout the whole ordeal. Your mother's situation is challenging, he acknowledged after I explained Jane's call. The church has been helping with some essentials, but we don't have housing resources. What about that senior apartment she's supposedly on a waiting list for? Is that real, or just something she's telling Jane? It's real, he confirmed. Oak Ridge Senior Living. But the waiting list is indeed quite long, 6 to 8 months at least. I drummed my fingers on the table, thinking, and she still refuses to consider the condo in the Hispanic community. I'm afraid so. I thanked him and hung up, an idea taking shape. My mother needed affordable housing, something temporary until a more permanent solution became available. And I knew exactly where to find it, even if she wouldn't like the terms. The next day, I drove to Jane's apartment after work. My mother answered the door, surprise evident on her face. Rebecca, I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The apartment was cluttered with her belongings, boxes stacked along walls, her furniture crammed into corners. Jane was nowhere to be seen. Jane's at her book club, my mother explained, following my gaze. She goes every Tuesday. I nodded, taking a seat at the small dining table. I hear you're wearing out your welcome. She flinched slightly at my directness. Jane's being dramatic. We're getting along fine. That's not what she says. And looking around, I can see why. This place isn't big enough for both of you. My mother sat across from me, her posture defensive. I suppose she called you to complain. She called me hoping I'd solve the problem, either by taking you in or by paying for someplace else. And will you? A flicker of hope crossed her face. No. I kept my voice level. But I do have a proposal. She waited, her expression guarded. I found you a place. It's a 1-bedroom apartment, month-to-month lease, utilities included. It's not fancy, but it's clean, safe, and within your budget if you're careful with your Social Security payments. Where is it? She asked suspiciously. The Magnolia Gardens complex. Her eyes widened. That's for low-income seniors. Yes, it is. And you currently qualify as a low-income senior. I can't live there, she protested. Those apartments are basic. They're clean and functional, I countered. I toured one yesterday. The residents I met seemed friendly. Many of them are in situations similar to yours, downsizing after losing larger homes. People would talk. Everyone knows me in this town. I leaned forward. Let me be very clear, Mom. This is not me paying for luxury accommodations so you can save face with your friends. This is me finding you a practical solution that you can afford on your own. Take it or don't. That's entirely up to you. She studied me, perhaps realizing for the first time that I truly wouldn't budge. How soon could I move in? Next week? I've already spoken to the property manager and put down the security deposit. I held up a hand as hope flashed across her face. That's a one-time gesture, not ongoing support. The monthly rent is your responsibility. She nodded slowly, resignation settling over her features. I suppose I don't have much choice. You always have choices, Mom. This is just one of the realistic ones. As I stood to leave, she remained seated, looking smaller somehow, diminished by circumstances she'd never imagined would apply to her. Rebecca, she called as I reached the door. Thank you. For the deposit. You didn't have to do that. No, I didn't, I agreed. Consider it the last financial help you'll receive from me. Unless I say the right things about Zoe. Her voice had an edge now. Is that the condition? I turned back, surprised by her perception. There's no condition, Mom. My decision about the mortgage wasn't a punishment or a bargaining chip. It was a boundary. I won't subsidize someone who disrespects my daughter, or me. It's that simple. Nothing between us has ever been simple, she said softly. On that point, at least, we could agree. My mother moved into Magnolia Gardens the following week. The apartment was indeed basic but clean and bright, with a small balcony overlooking a shared garden. Jane helped with the move, clearly relieved to reclaim her space. I kept my distance, having done what I felt was reasonable to prevent outright homelessness. Zoe continued to see her grandmother occasionally, always with either Miguel or me present. Summer faded into fall. Zoe started 3rd grade, growing taller and more confident by the day. My accounting practice expanded, requiring me to hire an assistant. Life settled into a new normal, one where my mother existed on the periphery rather than at the center of family obligations. Then, in late October, nearly a year after the comment that had started it all, my mother called me on a Sunday afternoon. Rebecca. Her voice sounded strange, hesitant. Could you come over to my apartment? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. My guard immediately went up. What kind of something? It's personal. I'd rather talk in person. I hesitated, suspicious of her motives but curious despite myself. I can stop by tomorrow after work. Thank you, she paused. Would you bring Zoe? I've barely seen her these past few weeks. Not this time, I said firmly. Whatever you want to discuss, let's keep it between us for now. The next evening, I drove to Magnolia Gardens after my last client meeting. The complex was modest but well-maintained, with neat gardens and clean walkways. Several elderly residents nodded to me as I made my way to Building C, clearly accustomed to visitors. My mother answered my knock promptly, dressed more formally than I expected for a home visit. She'd fixed her hair, applied makeup, even put on the pearl earrings that had once been her mother's. You look nice, I commented, stepping inside. Special occasion? In a way. She gestured to the small dining table, already set with her good china, the few pieces she'd kept during the move, and a plate of cookies. Would you like some tea? The formality was disorienting. This wasn't her usual approach. My mother typically veered between martyred silence and passive-aggressive comments, not proper hostess behavior. Sure, I agreed, taking a seat. The apartment looked different from when I'd last seen it. She'd arranged her remaining furniture thoughtfully, added curtains, placed family photos on the walls. She'd made it a home. She poured tea from a familiar porcelain pot, another rescued item from her previous life. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, both of us perhaps wondering how we'd reached this point. How's Zoe? She finally asked. She's doing well. Straight A's so far this year. Her dance teacher says she has real talent. My mother nodded, a small smile touching her lips. She gets that from your side. I was quite the dancer in high school, you know? I didn't know, actually. It struck me how little my mother had shared about her own youth, her own dreams and disappointments. You wanted to discuss something, I prompted, not wanting to get sidetracked. She set down her teacup with deliberate care. Yes, she took a deep breath. I've been doing some thinking these past months. About what happened, about the things I said to Zoe. I waited, not making it easier for her. Whatever she wanted to say, she needed to say it herself. I was wrong, she said finally, the words seeming to cost her considerable effort. Not just careless with my words, as I tried to claim before, but wrong in my thinking. I stared at her, stunned. In 32 years, I had never heard my mother admit to being wrong about anything substantial. What brought this on? I asked cautiously. She gestured vaguely around the apartment. Living here, for one thing. Half my neighbors are people I would have avoided before, people whose skin colors and accents I would have judged, but they've been kind to me, helped me adjust, invited me to their gatherings. She shook her head slightly. It's been educational. I raised an eyebrow. So you're saying you're not prejudiced anymore because your neighbors are nice? No, she said sharply. I'm saying I've been forced to confront my prejudices because circumstances put me in a position where I couldn't avoid people I previously would have, and in doing so, I've had to question why I held those views in the first place. She looked down at her hands. It's not a comfortable process. I imagine not. There's more. She reached for a folder on the side table, handing it to me. I've been attending a discussion group at a different church. Pastor Williams recommended it. It's about reconciliation. understanding privilege, that sort of thing. I opened the folder. Inside were printed materials, handouts from what appeared to be a racial reconciliation program run by a local Methodist church. I looked up in surprise. "This doesn't seem like your kind of thing." "It's not," she admitted. "It's uncomfortable and challenging and sometimes makes me angry. But I keep going. Because," she hesitated, "because I don't want to be the kind of person who hurts her granddaughter without even realizing it's wrong." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. But all I saw was an elderly woman struggling with long-held beliefs, making an effort I never thought she was capable of. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What do you want?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Well, not nothing. I want a chance to have a real relationship with Zoe, and with you, without the constant supervision and suspicion. But I know I haven't earned that yet." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm not asking you to resume financial support. I'm managing on my own, and it's been good for me to learn independence." "Then what?" "I want to apologize," she said simply. "Properly apologize, not just make excuses, to both you and Zoe. And I want you to know I'm trying to change, not just my words, but my thinking." I sat back, absorbing this unexpected turn. My mother, stubborn, judgmental, set in her ways, was admitting fault and actively working to change. It seemed almost unbelievable. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "but you understand why I might be skeptical." She nodded. "Of course you are. I've given you no reason to trust me. That's why I'm not asking for anything except the chance to demonstrate over time that I mean what I say." We talked for another hour, covering ground we'd never explored before. She spoke about her own upbringing, the casual racism that had been normalized in her childhood home, the limited exposure she'd had to people different from herself. None of it excused her behavior, but it helped me understand it better. As I prepared to leave, she handed me a sealed envelope. "For Zoe," she explained. "An apology letter. But I'd like to tell her in person as well, when you think it's appropriate." I took the envelope, making no promises. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Driving home, I turned our conversation over in my mind. Was this genuine change or just another manipulation tactic? The evidence pointed to the former, the discussion group, the new relationships with diverse neighbors, the willingness to acknowledge fault without conditions. But years of experience made me cautious. I decided to take it slowly, to watch for consistency, for proof that this wasn't just a temporary performance to win back access to Zoe. When I got home, I read the letter she'd written to my daughter. It was simple, direct, and age-appropriate, acknowledging that she had been wrong to make comments about Zoe's skin, explaining that she was learning to change her thinking, and promising to do better. No excuses, no qualifications. 2 weeks later, I allowed my mother to join us for dinner at our home, the first time she'd been invited back since that fateful evening a year before. Zoe was delighted, especially after reading the letter, which had clearly touched her deeply. "Everyone makes mistakes, Mom," she told me with the straightforward forgiveness that children often manage better than adults. Grandma said she's sorry. During dinner, I watched my mother carefully. She interacted with Zoe naturally, asking about school and dance, listening attentively to her stories. Not once did she comment on her appearance, not even with the compliments that had always carried subtle barbs. When Zoe excused herself to finish homework, my mother and I sat in the living room with coffee. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For giving me another chance. I'm doing it for Zoe," I clarified. "She wants her grandmother in her life." "I understand." She hesitated. "And the mortgage?" I met her gaze directly. "That chapter is closed, Mom. I meant what I said. I won't be resuming financial support." She nodded, accepting this without protest. "I know. I'm adjusting to my new circumstances. It's actually been freeing in a strange way. I'm learning to live within my means for the first time in decades." As we sat in the growing dusk, a fragile peace settled between us. Not forgiveness, exactly. That would take more time and evidence of lasting change. But perhaps the beginning of a new kind of relationship. One based on honesty and respect rather than obligation and enablement. Nearly 2 years have passed since that night when my mother's casual cruelty changed everything between us. So much has happened in that time. Changes I could never have predicted. My mother still lives at Magnolia Gardens, though she's on the waiting list for Oak Ridge Senior Living. She's made friends there, joined committees, even started volunteering at a local after-school program, something she would never have considered in her previous life. Our relationship has slowly improved. We'll never be as close as some mothers and daughters, but we've found a new equilibrium based on clearer boundaries and expectations. I no longer pay her mortgage, and she no longer makes comments about Zoe's appearance. Zoe, now 10 and wise beyond her years, has flourished. She's excelling in school, advancing in dance, and developing a strong sense of identity and self-worth. She visits her grandmother regularly, sometimes even staying overnight at the apartment, something I would have considered unthinkable 2 years ago. As for me, I've changed too. The woman who silently paid her mother's mortgage for 7 years, who made excuses for harmful behavior, who prioritized family obligation over her child's emotional well-being, she's gone. In her place is someone stronger, clearer about her boundaries, unafraid to protect what matters most. Last week, my mother called with news. A spot has opened up at Oak Ridge. She'll be moving next month to a nicer apartment in a more prestigious community. She can afford it now. She's been saving carefully from her Social Security, and she sold some jewelry and antiques she'd been holding on to. I wanted you to know, she told me, that I'm handling it myself. No financial help needed. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was truly self-sufficient. I'm glad, I said, and meant it. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, watching as Zoe practiced cartwheels on the lawn. Her skin glowed golden in the late afternoon sun, her curls bouncing with each movement. Perfect, just as she was. Sometimes the hardest debts to settle are the ones we don't even realize we're paying. The emotional taxes of enabling harmful behavior, of accepting disrespect as normal, of putting others' comfort above our children's well-being. By stopping my mother's mortgage payments, I wasn't just cutting a financial tie. I was ending a pattern of enabling that had allowed her to avoid the consequences of her words and actions for decades. Some might call it cruel to let an elderly woman face foreclosure. But I've come to understand that true cruelty would have been continuing to subsidize the comfortable lifestyle that insulated her from the need to change, to grow, to reckon with her own prejudices. In the end, losing her home was the best thing that could have happened to my mother. It forced her out of isolation and into a community where diversity couldn't be avoided. It pushed her to develop independence and resilience she never knew she possessed. It created the conditions for genuine growth. And for Zoe, seeing her mother stand firm in protection of her dignity was a lesson more valuable than any I could have taught with words alone. Some debts aren't paid with money, but with silence. The silence of withdrawing support from harmful behavior, of refusing to explain or justify firm boundaries, of allowing natural consequences to speak for themselves. In that silence, truth can finally be heard. And sometimes, if you're lucky, healing can begin.